Hey guys, I'm Chris.
And I'm Mike.
And welcome back to No Limits, the Thriller Podcast. What's your updates this week, Mike?
Well, you wished me a happy birthday just about 2 weeks ago. So now it's my turn. Happy birthday to the doctor, Dr. Furman.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's funny. We both have like birthdays like within a week of each other.
Right. And you know what else is coming up this week? April 29th is a special day for No Limits. The 2-year anniversary of our first ever episode on the Mitch Rapp podcast.
Wow, we've been doing this for 2 years.
2 years, my friend.
Wow, that's crazy. Would you have told me at the beginning of the pandemic that we would have a podcast, 3 feeds, let alone into season 2 with Scott Harvath, and then doing this feed, talking to authors, talking to a bunch of stuff? That I would have never guessed that.
April's a special month. I feel like it's No Limits month. We celebrate.
It is. First your birthday, then my birthday, then the birthday of the pod. So there we go.
All right, I'm proposing a tradition. Just like we did the other day, we have to have a golf round with the boys. All 4 of us, every April. That's got to be a tradition.
Yeah, we've been doing it now. I guess this is the second year we've done it. Like
right.
Close to both mine and your birthday, and as well as Tom, one of our other buddies,
exactly,
who has a birthday in April. So yeah, no, we should definitely keep that tradition going.
Yeah. Good golf round, happy birthdays, and the podcast is rolling along. So Chris, what are we covering today? We've got a good guest coming on the show.
Yeah, so we were just talking about this before we started. We have a repeat guest, and he was the very first author in our author series that we covered on season 1 of No Limits, the Mitch Rapp podcast. He wasn't the first author. We interviewed Kyle first, but then released 1 week after our interview with Kyle, we released our interview with Ward Larsen, and now he's back. He's got another book, and yeah, Mike, you had the opportunity to talk to him as well as Andrews and Wilson when I was on paternity leave. So yeah, this is a great interview for you guys.
Yeah, you were on baby duty, so I was just reading and interviewing and chugging along, doing what I do over here. And yeah, I remember actually, we were doing the No Limits podcast, and so I was just getting into, rekindling my love of thrillers, everything Mitch Rapp. We were getting established on social media, and I never heard of an ARC, an advanced reader's copy.
Yeah, you hadn't, yeah.
Yeah, no idea that all over social media, they were giving away, doing little contests for advanced reader copies before a book came out. And one random thing I tweeted or responded to was by this guy, Ward Larsen. Chris, to this day, Assassin's Strike, which came out in 2020, is one of my favorite thrillers. I think it was a candidate for Book of the Year that year. It was really good.
It was very good.
I mean, Blacktop Wasteland 2 came out that year, so that took the top spot for me. But Assassin's Strike was awesome. Got that from Ward, had him on the show, and I've read every one of his books since. And I went back and read a couple of the early ones in the Assassin series. And just a few weeks ago, the 7th title in the Assassin series came out, Assassin's Edge. And in 2021, a novella, an origin story, Assassin's Dawn, came out. So good chance for anybody who hasn't gotten into Ward's work really to pick up Assassin's Dawn. It's an origin story, so you can get it from the very beginning. And it's a novella, so it's a quick read, and you will quickly realize you could be down with David Slayton, the main character. So all the Assassin's books work. You could pick them up in any order. Don't necessarily need to go in order. And they're techno thrillers where Ward gets the technology down. And he was a pilot, so you can always count on, still is a pilot, you'll hear in the interview. You can always count on his awesome plane scenes. He's just got a lot of cool stuff going on. Really cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read the new one, but I remember all the drone usage in the last one was very good.
Right.
So.
Yeah, he pushes the boundaries of technology and flight. And this one, we're going to talk about Assassin's Edge. He does the opposite, goes underwater for a little bit with some scuba diving and submarine action.
All right, yeah, so we hope you enjoyed this interview with Ward Larsen. You can check him out. I don't know if you plug it in the pod, but you can find him at wardlarsen.com. There's, he's done a bunch of books, and you look at the cover and the synopsis on his website. So hope you enjoy this interview.
Today, we welcome a very special guest for the second time on our author series on the No Limits Thriller podcast. Ward Larsen was our first interview almost 2 years ago in August 2020 on episode number 20. Welcome back, Ward Larsen.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 2 books for you, one a novella, and the next full episode in the Assassin series. So you've been busy these past 2 years.
Yeah, I have. I still have a day job. I fly for an airline, but I took some time off. I had a program during COVID when you could take time off from flying, and I did, and just sat home and wrote for 11 months because I couldn't go out and do anything else. So actually, last year I did 2 books, and with the way it takes a while to get to shelf, it's going to be next year before those next 2 come out. But it's I'm staying ahead of things, staying very busy.
And you're back to flying now, is that right?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Good. Any good destinations, places you've been or looking to go?
Been to Aruba a couple times lately for the first time, because we kind of stopped doing that during the pandemic. But so that was kind of neat. It's a neat place down there. I like it.
Okay. And remind me, do you fly commercially? Are you private?
Yeah, I fly for Southwest.
Okay, great. Let's jump into it. Like we said, you've been busy. I want to back up here and talk about Assassin's Dawn, a novella that you published in 2021. And holy cow, this was explosive. Where did you get the idea and inspiration to go back in time and flesh out a little bit of David Slayton's earlier career and backstory?
Well, I had kind of a gap in between books, so I wanted to do something to kind of keep the train rolling. And I figured it might be a little different. I knew I was going to do a novella, and so it was about 1/3 the length of a full novel. And because it was different like that, I just got the idea of going back and doing a prequel to kind of flesh out a little bit of where he got his start, with Mossad. And so that was basically the genesis of it, and went from there.
Yeah, I know a few authors, they've taken this approach, but not just the origin story. We have The American Assassin with Mitch Rapp.
Yes.
But also the novella approach of filling in some gaps. That approach does a lot for the universe. So it kind of fleshed out some characters in David's history, and it went into his motivations of why he became the badass assassin that he is. Is that something you think the Thrillerverse is moving more to and we'll see more authors do? Or is this just something you wanted to do so you did it, or did you see it as part of a trend?
I don't know if it's a trend. I think doing novellas intermittently is a trend. And yeah, you can fill in gaps. You can do little side stories. I've also seen where there will be spin-offs of other characters in the story that kind of get spin-offs for novellas and other books. But it was just something I wanted to do. And I felt like, the book is, I'm writing number 10 right now. And Assassin's Edge, which is coming out next week, is number 9 in the series. And I just felt like it had been a long time since that beginning. And I wanted to kind of, go back to that a little bit and kind of remind people where he came from and where, what his genesis was. So I think just because the series has been going on for a while, the first one was published 14 years ago. And I just wanted to go back to that and kind of remind everyone where he'd come from.
Perfect Assassin. That was the first one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that was 14 years. Okay. I just picked it up.
It was.
I want to say shortly before we last interviewed you, but I can't believe it's aged, because I remember that being really good. I think Slayton was on a boat. Is that right?
Yes, yes. He started out on a boat. Yeah, that's the very first song.
That's right. So I noticed with the novella, and by the way, for our audience, we're not going to spoil the specifics just yet. So feel free to keep listening if you haven't read Assassin's Dawn or Assassin's Edge. But Ward was kind enough to stay with us. And towards the end of this interview, we're going to give you a spoiler warning. And so once you pick up these books, once you devour them, come on back. In the last 20 or so minutes of our conversation, we'll dig into the more specifics and the spoilers with the characters and the plots of what happens, because some pretty big stuff happens here. But before we get to Assassin's Edge, one more thing on Dawn. I noticed your writing had to be a little different in the novella format, where I think you do an amazing job in the rest of the series getting into tech specs. When it's planes, you could tell it is just
Oh
your
yeah,
bread and butter.
that's my deal.
Right. We've dealt with drones in Assassin's Strike. We're dealing with subs in Assassin's Edge. I feel like in Assassin's Dawn, you had to limit the tech specs and the details of the weaponry and the transportation. Was that a different part of your craft for a novella?
Well, I think more so it went back to his beginnings, because in the beginning he didn't have all those assets. He was working for Mossad, and he was more of an operator, just an operative who almost more of a spy than he was a special operator with all the tools and all the gadgets. So I think that just fit the story. That's why there weren't so many in that one. It was more just surveillance and the typical more intelligence type stuff than it was a military end of it.
Right. That's definitely a change we see in the character. And your writing was, because I noticed it, that he was still young, he was still raw and not fully experienced, where he can ID every weapon, every sound of a plane, or yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Assassin's Edge, this is the new release. When everyone listens to this, it will already be available. So we absolutely recommend you pick up your copy, not only of Assassin's Dawn, the prequel, but also Assassin's Edge. You said it's number 9 in the series?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And I want to start with a quote that you had received from none other than Kyle Mills.
I thought you might pick up on that.
And right on the cover, Kyle writes about your book, quote, "A smart, edgy techno thriller that provides a glimpse into tomorrow's battles and the weapons they will be fought with." All right, this is coming from Kyle Milstradamus. So how did you feel getting that?
That was awesome. I approached Kyle about it, and he and the people at Emily Bester were very, very gracious about it. And I gave him an early copy of the manuscript. It's probably changed a little bit since he saw it, but the bones are certainly there. And yeah, he read it and liked it. Gave me a great review on it. So very much appreciated to Kyle. Because I know he's a busy guy. I know he's got a very busy schedule, and he goes between, I think, Spain and is it Montana or Wyoming. I know he's up in the upper Midwest somewhere.
Right.
But yeah.
And then wood carving and rock climbing, man of many talents.
Yes, exactly.
Predicting the future on the side,
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a blog post where in his newsletter, he was basically sharing the secrets of the trade, not about writing, but about how he predicts the future. And he noted that if you're really plugged in and you're really thinking for yourself, learn from others, read everything you can from a variety of sources across the aisle, but then really make up your own mind and think about it. You can, geopolitically speaking, get a handle on the world and where it's headed. I feel like that's a skill our friends Anton Block and David Slayton can do. So how do you take your knowledge of current events and political maneuvering? I mean, there's some stuff with Russia in this book. How do you put that into your characters so that you too are predicting the future, as Kyle gives you credit for?
Yeah, well, as writers, that's kind of our job. Kyle does it. I know Brad Thor does it. We all do, and we're trying to look ahead. I remember back in I think it was 94, Tom Clancy wrote a book called Debt of Honor, I believe it was. And that was the one where you had a terrorist crashing a 747 into the joint session of Congress. Oh. And that was kind of like a wow kind of plot, he came up with that. And this was 7 years before 9/11. So, he kind of predicted that. And, I think maybe we should have paid a little more attention to that. To me, that's, as a writer, that's our job, is to come up with these plots. And I don't think that we're thinking of anything the bad guys can't think of. So I view it as almost a public service to kind of, predict where things are going and where the threat is. And it's difficult to, in these kinds of books, you're basically trying to put the world at risk. You can use nuclear, chemical, biological, World War III, but there's only so many ways you could do that to create that big overhanging risk. And everybody's done it, and it's been done a lot of different ways. So it's hard to think of a new angle on it, a new spin on it. So that's one of the harder parts of my job. But I read a lot. This book, Assassin's Edge, it gets a little into the technical stuff. But I did that intentionally, and there's a lot of new technologies out there that are really changing warfare. We're seeing it in Ukraine right now, where we have a tank army coming across the border into Ukraine, and it's just getting wiped out by drones and by some really nice missiles that are anti-tank missiles, and it's kind of changed the whole gauge of warfare. That tank armies are not going to do that well anymore. So there's really a lot of changes out there, and maybe the Russians didn't see that coming, but it works. So yeah, you got to look forward to see what technologies are developing. And I read a lot of periodicals. I read Aviation Week, Space Technology, which that's where I got a lot of the stuff that's in this book. And so yeah, you got to stay ahead of it.
Right. And soon enough in our spoiler section, I do want to get into those specific technical nuances and some weapons that you introduced that, whoa, really got me thinking, maybe keeping me up at night. So I do want to talk a little bit about that in a few moments.
Another thing that's fun for me as a writer is there was an Assassin's Silence 3 or 4 books ago. I came up with a notional thing that David Slayton carried around. And what it was basically, I think you've probably seen them before on iPads. They have an app you can put up where you can fold it up to the sky and you can see constellations and satellites, and it tells you where everything is.
Yes.
Well, I just said, wouldn't it be a cool idea if the intelligence agency had an app that you could put on a phone like that, hold it up to the sky, and see what assets are up there as far as drones, satellites that he could access to look over the next hill. I mean, wouldn't that be a great thing for a guy on the ground to have, a special operator, because he's probably going to need access to that.
Yeah.
But so I just kind of made it up. I don't know if that exists or not, but it's fun as a writer to kind of dream up things like that.
I feel like the traditional motif there is the operator has to report to the HQ, or let's say to Langley, and then Langley has to have their people maneuver the drones, and then they have to see if any of the weather satellite people or whoever, all this coordination.
Exactly.
But imagine if the operative can manipulate that right there.
Imagine if you cut out all the middlemen and just had it where you can just tap on a screen and get the information. I mean, obviously you can only do it for a very high-end mission where you need that, you have the authority to do that, but wouldn't it be a great thing to have?
Damn. I mean, has anybody contacted you for a different job offer?
And you know what? I haven't had a security clearance proper for over 20 years now. So, and I don't have any, sources that I get anything classified from. So I make this stuff up. I don't even send it to DOD to be vetted because I don't have any classified stuff in there. If I do, I'm just guessing it. It's just accidental. So
it's pure fiction. Yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah. You mentioned Ukraine. So while we're talking about this fine line between accidentally getting it right, being a little too close to home, how do you think, maybe you could speak for yourself, but also in general, how do you think thriller authors will handle the Ukraine situation moving forward? It's really upending a lot of my preconceived notions about what war in the 21st century is going to look like down the road. I'm like, I thought we were done with tanks literally rolling across land borders that have been established and are internationally enforced and recognized. But that whole schema is broken. It's going to affect China, Taiwan situation, Pakistan, India. There's just so many of these scenarios that I feel like this could be a spark for. How are thriller authors going to incorporate that or deal with that moving forward?
Well, first of all, you have to understand the schedule. If I start writing a book today, it takes me 8-10 months to write that book, and then it takes another 10 months to get the shelf. So you kind of have to be careful because I have no idea how this Ukraine thing is going to end. I don't know where the border is going to be. I don't know if Putin's going to still be around. So you have to not commit too hard to it because you don't know what the end game is. You don't want to get halfway through a book, have the world situation change, and your plot is now invalid. So I think what you're going to see for the next, 12 months from now, you're going to see people mentioning that war, but not really getting too deep into it because they don't know, how it's going to turn out. But it certainly gets the wheels turning. I remember back to Red War, Kyle's book, and how that one was, it was the one where Krupin got a terminal disease or so he thought. And he wanted to create a diversion and, to stay in power, basically. And he's looking for a way to hold him in power. and the diversion was to invade NATO. And Kyle, I was just reading this book again back in January. I kind of went back and wanted to read that one again, and it was interesting that Kyle had him fainting that he was going to invade Ukraine, and instead he went for the Baltic states.
Exactly.
And I just thought about, because he wrote that. I mean, the book came out 4 years ago almost, right. And he probably wrote it at least a year before that. And a lot of that stuff's still valid. So it really, kudos to Kyle for, staying on that ball. Yeah, you got to just keep up with current events, see what's going on in the world. And, thriller writers, that's what we do. But that one really struck home. I remembered that.
Oh, it's so true. Yeah, he actually, Kruputin, actually rolled tanks into Latvia and was testing NATO's resolve. What will NATO, particularly the U.S., do? Is Article 5 going to hold up, or will they cower? And well, thankfully, Mitch and Scott were on the ground and organized the Latvian resistance. Can you imagine a Mitch, a Scott, or even a David Slayton, in the trenches with President Zelensky? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Another plot that just kind of flew into my mind and that I liked, that actually was a little different, and I really enjoyed it, was Brad Thor's book. I don't remember the title, but it was the one where he was on a transport. He had been captured and it crashed in snowy Russia.
Backlash.
Yeah. And that book was really cool to me because it was basically SERE training. So, survival, escape, resistance, and evasion. That's what that book was. And that was a really cool angle, having been through SERE myself. And I really thought that was neat the way he went about that book.
And that's why we're pumped to have launched season 2 of the podcast, Brad Thor and the Scott Harvath series. Chris and I have both said Backlash, that you're referring to, is one of our favorites. Lions of Lucerne, the OG, the original Scott Harvath book, we just covered. And man, he came out swinging. Still possibly one of my all-time favorite thrillers. Yeah, that we're excited to do it for that exact reason. It has real, and I feel like Brad Thor, since we're talking geopolitical, I think he's the master of a thriller writer who gets, anticipates, and can war game, these different countries. And Rising Tiger is now going to be involve China, and Black Ice just involved basically the Arctic and the Russian scramble to control Arctic navigation. These are all real plot lines. Your book, Assassin's Edge, which I do want to get to, also goes up into the Arctic with Wrangel Island.
Yes. Well, one of the things I wanted to really impress in Edge is that right now, we have these new technologies coming around, and what's getting really murky, war is getting murky. It's oftentimes, when Putin first went into Ukraine, he didn't do it formally. He put in his little green men. He had these sanitized, basically soldiers coming in, but it's more of in the shadows now. And there's no reason you can't do that with higher tech weapons. And so attribution becomes a problem. You're getting attacked by some very high tech weapons, and you don't know where they're coming from. And you don't want to go to war with somebody unless you're absolutely sure. And that to me in the future could be a problem. And certainly with cyber, that's a problem. Like, you can do some real damage with cyber. Attributing it is really difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and that's a theme of Assassin's Edge, is these false flag operations. And take it for what it's worth with the U.S. and Biden administration response to Ukraine. But I remember just days, I think, prior to the invasion, the U.S. government put out false flag warnings that the Russians were filming propaganda, that they were setting up, fake Ukrainian military installations to look like they're firing across the Russian border. And
right.
That's a hard thing unless you have a really strong intelligence network to know what's going on. And people with social media can be very convinced of anything these days. So you kind of incorporate that. We're going to talk in a moment in the spoiler section with Assassin's Edge of essentially being a false flag operation.
Right.
But one more connection to Ukraine here. So many thrillers now that it's crazy to say, but almost a decade removed from the Syrian conflict. So many characters are battle hardened, or they were involved in the Syrian conflict, and that's where they got their expertise and their experience from. A lot of the villains and the bad guys. I feel like we could see thriller writers down the road, 5-10 years out, maybe saying a lot of their guys got training or battle hardened on the streets of Ukraine.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole middle, I mean, we're out of Afghanistan now too.
Right.
The Middle East, it's not really settling down, but to the West it is. We're not there anymore. Boots on the ground. I'm sure there are a few people here and there, but that's probably going to drive thrillers to go elsewhere. Of course, China is the big one these days. They're probably the real geopolitical threat is China. Russia is becoming Venezuela with nuclear weapons. They're just a little very, they're a one-legged economy of, oil is all they have. They do have a lot of nuclear weapons, though. A lot of them. I don't know if they're keeping them up very well, but, and for a company that has, a lot of nuclear know-how, the fact that they are bombing, Chernobyl with artillery shells seems kind of strange to me. It's funny that night they were attacking the reactors, the facility at Chernobyl, which Chernobyl isn't active anymore, but it's got a lot of waste they have to manage. So they have people there managing the remains of it so that it doesn't get out of control, and, they're basically peppering it with artillery. And I looked at it. There was a large fire at one point.
Right.
And that night I just happened to be out flying, and I looked at my weather. I looked at my weather on my iPad, and spun it over to Ukraine and looked at the upper level winds. The upper level winds are blowing straight to Moscow. So how smart was that?
Honestly, come on.
I mean, if you have nuclear know-how to do something so silly as that, winds generally blow from the west to the east. So anything they stir up in Chernobyl is going to go straight into Russia.
Honestly, a left hand, right hand, they can't coordinate. I can't even. Their ass from their head. Great stuff. And I really want to dig into a couple of these spoilers. So last thing before we move into the actual spoilers of these two books, the cover, your covers. And on the podcast, we like a good cover. We have a section where we call it judge a cover by the book. We like to judge the covers if they actually relate to the storylines. And let me tell you, the cover of Assassin's Edge, I've always loved your covers, but this one might be the winner.
I got to tell you, there was a near disaster on that, though. I told him, there's a submarine in the Arctic. I haven't had, that kind of thing on the cover before. So, okay, good. So they send that to the cover designer, and he comes back with pretty much what, we got, except the submarine looked like something out of Run Silent, Run Deep. It was like a World War II thing cruising along. It was a U-boat or something. And I was like, hang on, this is a little more modern submarine. And I gave them the class, and they fixed it. But it was like, let's not do that.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, these subs are pretty modern. Like I said before, feel like your bread and butter is the planes, but you tackled the subs here. Not as detailed, but like a Tom Clancy, Red October. I had some help on that. Brian Andrews of Andrews and Wilson, he was very helpful because he's a former sub guy, and he gave me a lot of help on the sub stuff to make sure it all made sense. So, you gotta research it. Well, the cover came out fantastic. So your team took that feedback, absolutely rocked it. And then the animated cover, I have never seen that before.
I hadn't either. I thought it was pretty cool. I'm not sure how they did that.
How did that come about?
Yeah, I don't know. They just said, "Hey, look what we got for you," and there was like smoke in the background coming up. It was cool. It's online. It's up on my website if anybody wants to see it. But yeah, there's an animated version of the cover, and it's just about 5 seconds long. But it was a cool little gadget.
Well, let me tell you, Mitrap Pod, we absolutely love talking covers, and this will go down in the annals. This is a big one, and the animated piece just puts it over the top.
Thanks. I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I hope it starts a trend. I hope that picks up some steam. I'd love to see some Mitrap covers, some Brad Thor covers, animated like that. You might have started something. And the folks at Forge, is that right? Who your publisher is?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, Tor Forge.
All right. Shout out to them. Absolutely crushing it with this. Well, we are going to switch over to some spoilers. Go ahead, pick up your copy if you haven't yet. Assassin's Dawn, the novella, and Assassin's Edge, the 9th book in the Assassin series. Last call, spoiler warning, hit pause, save the podcast till after you have read the books. I've got to start with Trident. Whoa, huge reveal at the ending, kind of a cliffhanger. We've got some Chinese operators in the shadows pulling strings. Is this where we're headed next?
Yeah, and it's the first time. Yeah, it's the first time I've done this where I've actually done almost a 2-book, sequel. In fact, I could even stretch it to 3. I'm writing the next one right now, so I'm kind of right in the middle of it. But yeah, this is going to be at least a 2-book story that kind of continues on. So yeah, they're going to get theirs.
We noticed the Mitch Rapp books. Now that we covered the series, the ones that really were a cut above tended to have the 2-part arc. Believe it or not, Memorial Day and Consent to Kill came one after the other. I mean, for being 2 of the best thrillers ever written, they were back to back, one and then the other. And I didn't realize that at first. And then a couple of Vince's villains who really stand out, like Hank Clark and some of the senators operating the shadows, they had 2 or 3 book arcs. So I think that's pretty smart that this group Trident is going to be sticking around.
Yeah. It's one thing to have some constant characters that recur, but yeah, having a villain that carries between a couple books, I haven't done that before, really. So yeah, it's something new for me, and so far I'm liking it. Yeah.
You learn that the bad guys, this whole book, as bad as they are pawns or cogs in a bigger machine that keeps you wanting. It keeps you coming.
Right.
We also talked about the false flag operation before. You have the US and Russia being set up to almost go to war. Essentially, the whole operation being established is to make it look like the US fired this missile and sunk a Russian carrier. A little too close to home again?
I wrote that over a year ago, and here we are. And also at the very beginning, the first, the U.S. ship that sank in the Black Sea, that was right off Crimea. So yeah, we're right in the neighborhood again. So the carrier was funny. That was at the very end. That Admiral Kuznetsov is just it's sort of a punchline for navies. And I kind of dug some digs to it, and I think I'm sure you read. I took some digs at it because it's just got a terrible history. I mean, it has to actually be followed around wherever it goes by an ocean-going tug because they know it's going to break down. That's true.
I was really hoping some of your little digs at the Kuznetsov were true because you tear that ship a new one.
It's true. It's just a prestige thing. They want to have a carrier just to be able to say so.
Right.
And they also did actually sell her 2 sister ships. They sold the hulls, unfinished hulls, to China. And China, I think I said in the book, they turned one into their first carrier. Can't think of the name right now. And the other one was, for a time, turned into a floating casino. And then they actually decided they wanted a second carrier as well. So that's being retrofitted to become a second carrier.
So you have fun with this research, it seems. It
is fun, yeah. And I think the readers like that too. Like a few jibes here and there. And you got to have a sense of humor with it all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The description of the Russian ship and how it's been just piecemeal kind of patched up along the way, I thought was brilliant. A brilliant kind of lighthearted touch there when it got really heavy towards the end.
Yeah.
And also, I mentioned it earlier, going to Wrangel Island was really cool. And when we opened with a plane, I was like, oh, here we go. Ward's at it again. But very quickly, that plane disintegrates. And now it's a submarine and a scuba diving mission to recover the remains in the Arctic. Do you have scuba experience? Because you were really detailed in the tools and the navigation and what it's like to be underwater, basically in the Arctic.
Yeah, I do. I'm a diver. I'm an advanced diver, and I've been doing it for quite a while. I'm not an expert. I would say I'm an expert though, and I'm not an expert on cold water diving. I'm a warm water diver all the way. So I had to research, the dry chutes and that kind of thing. And again, Brian helped me a little, Brian Andrews, with, diving out of a sub, because that's not something I'm really familiar with. But yeah, and a lot of this is just stuff I got to thinking about, as I was writing, is wait, you can't do that. A compass isn't going to work up there because you're going to have, the magnetic variations excessive, and it's you can't have GPS, underwater. And, when you run out of air, normally as a diver up there, or normally as a diver, if you run out of air, get low, you just go to the surface and look for the boat. Can't do that in the Arctic. It's solid ice. You run out of air, you're dead. So there's a lot of complications up there. And I think it creates a pretty severe scene. So yeah, and I have a few regular readers who are real big divers, and they're really looking forward to this. I told them there's a lot of diving in it. So yeah.
Yeah, they've got a lot to look forward to. That might have been my favorite part of the book, is the recovery of the plane on Wrangel Island under the water. It's perhaps the most gripping moment because David gets split. He's down there on his own.
Yeah.
You got to kind of MacGyver and figure out your way to survive. And when there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And diving, I mean, I have been diving, at night, and night is kind of spooky when you're diving because, you have no sense of up or down. If you lose your lights, I mean, you are just in a void. And if you're neutrally buoyant, if you have your buoyancy set up right, it's just like being in outer space without the stars. You just can't tell up from down. The only thing that gives you any reference is your bubbles, really. And, trying to navigate when you don't have any light, just total pitch black like that. I mean, it's just a lot to think about. And it's, you really got to keep your wits about you.
The outer space reference, that scene is basically gravity underwater.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another thing about Wrangel Island, when you did your research on that, did you read In the Kingdom of Ice? A recommendation for you and the listeners here.
No, I did not.
And I'm a junkie for this stuff. It's one of those historical adventure stories of a missing ship in the Arctic. The USS Jeannette in 1880 went through the Bering Sea and was looking for a northern landmass, thinking you can cross the North Pole in the Arctic, and get to the other hemisphere by going across a landmass at the North Pole. Obviously not true. They were shipwrecked and had to survive on Wrangel Island. And I don't know if it's because I read that book, but the picture I got through your writing was exactly as it was detailed. This group of sailors surviving on the island back 140 years ago. What's your research like on geographic locations? Are you Google Mapsing it?
A lot of photos. You can find photos in any place like that. And that just gives you the picture, without actually going there. Because I didn't go to Wrangel Island, but
right, of course.
But yeah, I mean, just, seeing it and get as many, views as you can from different angles, different times of day, times of season, that kind of thing. And yeah, I just got to feel for it that way. And to your reference of the old whaling boat that got stranded there, I even had that. Remember the old rowboat? I had them find an old beat up rowboat on the island.
That's it, trapped in the ice.
Yeah, because that's what it was, a whaling thing back then, and
Correct.
It was explorers and whalers. That's all it had been there until 100 years ago.
Right, and they just found, it was not in the Arctic. I believe it was the Antarctic. They just found, which ship was that? That was pretty cool news. So I love that you threw in that tidbit.
Yeah.
All right, the big one, though. The big spoiler here is you throw out basically 3 weapons.
Yeah.
That, who knows, could be the wave of the future. Some of them, you said in the book, wrote that they were kind of shelved projects, that there was some R&D on. They were in the development stages, the radar jamming, the GPS beaconing. Really curious about that. And they were kind of shelved. And then someone took them off the archives and said, wait, let's build this out. Tell us about the radar jammers, the GPS beaconing devices to throw off GPS. Where'd that come from?
Yeah. We in the U.S. spend a lot of money, developing weapons. They don't all work out. DARPA has a lot of things they try, and a lot of times, they learn something from it, but then, we need to tweak this and that. So they kind of put this model aside and work on the next model. So yeah, we have a lot of, fancy weapons that are shelved that never quite make it to the front lines or go into production. In the book, right off the bat, I had the directed energy weapon. I didn't get too technical into exactly what kind, but that's what directed energy weapons do. They pulse laser. It just kind of creates conditions of heat, and I got into it a little bit when I did my research of the weapons effects that directed energy weapons have, and that's kind of what it would do to an airplane. Certain things in the airplane, certain avionics are hardened, where the electromagnetic pulse, like a nuclear blast, is not going to set them off. But there's different wavelengths, and they have different effects on materials and on aircraft and on munitions. So I got into that, did some research. But yeah, you can take down an airplane with a directed energy weapon. In fact, I thought this a few years ago. Remember at the end of I think it was the end of the Obama administration, there was a period when North Korea was launching these ICBMs, or trying to, and they just had failure after failure after failure. And I couldn't help but think, I wonder if there's a reason for that.
Yep.
I never, there's no answer to it. If there is, it's classified. But, I always suspected maybe we had a hand in that. I did the direct energy weapon in that first attack. Yeah, the other one, the GPS weakening, that was sort of a hybrid attack, but basically it was a hack slash attack, a hack slash electronic attack to take over the navigation of the ship. And I did some research on it. I didn't have any real intelligence on this, anything secret, but I know you talked about a GPS weakening. That is a thing. You can do that. And basically, you send out a signal that overrides, because the signal for GPS comes from outer space. It's pretty far away. If you're much closer, you can use a much smaller signal to override that GPS and put in a false signal, one that will slowly walk off the actual information to give you, a bad position. And, it's expensive to do and you need a reason to do it, but militaries can do that. And I did it back in the Cold War days in the 70s and 80s. They used to do it with just VHF navigation aids. Russians would set them up all along the border between East and West, and they would trick the navigations and the F4s and whatever it was to try to get them to fly across the border into enemy airspace. So it's the concept has been around a while. It's just the technology is new.
And there's so many applications for that. These devices, you can only imagine navigation in a plane and a ship. They're really heavily relying on these tools. You're not really questioning if the tool isn't calibrated or if the tool is hacked. You're kind of full steam ahead, right? Imagine as a pilot.
Very much so. Yeah. You trust it after a while because it's so accurate and so reliable, and, it's backed up 2-3 times. But, if somebody's messing with it, there's probably a way that it can be tricked.
Right. And then you had the ships also. It was kind of like a giant game of Battleship, but in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea.
Yeah.
It made me think of the importance of these straits. Like one ship comes through Gibraltar. You've got one crossing the Suez a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And now with, China, if we look at the Strait of Malacca and connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans, I feel like these are these choke points that are ripe for these stories. Look at what the Ever Givens, when it was stuck in the Suez, how it jammed up international commerce.
Yeah.
Put that together with the Meekening, and you have a recipe for catastrophe, really.
Absolutely. That's a good idea for a thriller.
Yeah, I'm wondering who's going to tackle the strait, because I was reading about the South China Sea, and honestly, so much commerce goes through this one couple mile stretch of water.
Yeah.
It's such an important hub to control. And then what happens if that comes unraveled? What if a strong man or someone with bad intentions does stronghold these choke points? What does that mean? Are we all held hostage?
Yeah, right now Turkey holds the Bosphorus Straits, and I talked a little about the treaty for that. In the book, I had a couple of paragraphs about the treaty for that, and that's Russia's lifeline because that's their only warm water port.
The warm water, right? Exactly. Like a theme we found on the podcast, these thrillers are not just beach reads. They're not basically romance novels for military espionage junkies. You learn a lot. You consider, you war game, you really think the implications of technology and warfare. They're not just that you turn off your brain and escape to a story. And I think your books absolutely prove that.
Yeah. And when things happen like is happening in Ukraine right now, I think by reading books like that, you'll have a much better sense. Things will start to make sense, and like, oh yeah, I see why it's happening that way.
Yep.
And you get a better understanding for military campaigns like that.
Last weapon you make, the hypersonic missile. These are a real thing. I'm not mistaken, right?
They are a real thing. Yeah.
Now yours went up to space. Is that how they typically work? They go to space
not
and come back?
Space, not quite. There's different ones. There's two kinds. There's the one like I had in my book, which is a hypersonic missile, and then there's also hypersonic glide vehicles, which I think are a little different. We kind of got behind on that. We did some hypersonic research back in the 90s, and it's always been known you could do it. but there's a lot of technical hurdles in terms of materials and propulsion, things like that. And then a few years back, both the Chinese and the Russians tested a hypersonic missile, and that kind of really got our attention. And I think, you probably read in the news in Ukraine, Russia used a hypersonic missile, which sounds really impressive. But really, it wasn't a very good use of that missile. It was more just showing off to show that they had one.
Right.
Because, they struck in I think it was an ammo dump or something. Yeah, it did some damage and took out an ammo dump, but you didn't need a hypersonic missile to do that. You don't need that kind of weapon. It's a waste. And they certainly don't have that many. But we have them now, and basically you can launch them from airplanes, you can launch them from ships, you can launch them from shore. But the big deal, and the reason we're so worried about them, is because we have a Navy that's designed around 11 or 12, whatever it is, carrier battle groups, and that is definitely a hypersonic missile is a huge threat to an aircraft carrier. Because there is no defense against it right now. They go so fast that the existing defenses, as I had in the book where they tried to shoot sparrows at it, the sparrows just chased it and ran out of gas, and there was nothing they could do. Yeah. It's just not designed to do that. So you're kind of defenseless. So we're really working on both getting our own hypersonic missiles right now and finding defenses for them, which really the defense for that is probably, if anything, some kind of directed energy weapon that goes at the speed of light. Because trying to intercept something that goes that fast with something else that goes that fast, it's a really hard mathematical problem.
You know what that made me think about? The hypersonic missile. I'm thinking when in the newest Star Wars movie, which was a complete disappointment, but when Admiral Holdo, she goes light speed kamikaze through a Star Destroyer. She takes her ship into hyperspace through a Star Destroyer. Like, that was brilliant. And now I'm thinking this hypersonic missile going through this Russian aircraft carrier.
And most hypersonic missiles don't even have warheads because they're just a dense piece of metal in the nose, and they're just going so fast. Right. They hit something and it becomes a plasma, and just everything becomes a weapon from that point. Right. Since you brought Star Wars, I'm trying to figure out, they've got directed energy weapons in Star Wars. They've got the stormtroopers carrying around whatever kind of weapons that is. How can they have such an advanced weapon, a handheld direct energy weapon, and they have no sighting device?
They can't hit anything.
They can't hit a darn thing.
That's funny. Our last podcast was episode 1 of Scott Harvath, and we covered Lions of Lucerne. I put in the notes for Chris, I said, there's a lot of stormtrooper syndrome going on here. And we got on the pod. He was confused. He's like, I see in the notes stormtrooper syndrome. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, how many shootouts were there where not a bullet finds their target? Ooh, whiz went past my head, or ooh, some rock chipped off over and over. I'm like, these guys just can't shoot. I guess that's a trope. You got to keep your hero alive.
You got to.
Last thing from Assassin's Edge that really left me wanting and thinking, and really the reason I'm going to come pick up the next one, Anton Bloch. I have loved this character. I'm a sucker for these old-timey spies, the mentors, Thomas Stansfield, Reed Carlton, dare I say it, Stan Hurley. Anton really takes a gut punch here.
He does. Yeah. And and that's, I think, how it is. I think you can't live a life that long in that kind of position without taking some real gut punches. And so, yeah, it's maybe a little out of the blue, but I did it that way. And I think it probably fit the scenario.
Can he stay in the game? Like, we know Slayton after loss comes back and just wants to exact even more revenge. Anton Bloch's getting older. What does revenge look like for him besides unleashing Slayton? You left me chewing on something.
Well, to be determined. To be determined. He hasn't had a big part in the last. Israel comes and goes in these stories because that's Slayton's origin. But I don't have the Israeli involvement in every one, so he kind of comes and goes. But yeah, we'll see how it affects him, and maybe I'm sure he'll not be out of the game. I'm sure he'll be back. He always keeps a hand in things.
Well, Ward, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to be a repeat guest on No Limits, the Thriller podcast. Really had a great time talking to you.
Great to be here, and best to Chris.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed that author series with Ward Larsen. What a great guy, Mike.
Yes.
So next time we come at you, we're going to be doing term limits. Is that what we decided?
No.
Terminalist, not term limits.
Two great first books, though, debut books by fantastic authors, both Term Limits and Terminalist. I could see the influence of one on the other. But yeah, we are going back to the Scott Harvath series in our season 2. So
right.
We'll be covering the next book over there in the Scott Harvath, Brad Thorth series. But we're going to dedicate May to Chris Howdy because Storm Rising, the fourth book in Haley Chill, will be coming out. We'll cover Deep State, the original book, Storm Rising, the new release coming out May 3rd. And then June, though, is a big month. So to give the folks a little schedule, June is big as we gear up for the release of the Terminalist TV show, which drops on July 1st. So in June, we're going to cover the Terminalist and In the Blood, Jack Carr's newest release. That way you can be all caught up and, know what's going on and get ready for the Terminalist TV series starring Chris Pratt to drop on Amazon Prime July 1st. So those are our next 2 months, May and June.
Nice. Maybe we can squeeze in a pod to talk about Insurrection Day. I've been wanting to talk to you about that one. So
yes. Hey, May is Chris Howdy month, so we'll see what we can get in there. Yeah, great book. Right.
So be on the lookout for whatever Chris Howdy we do on this feed, and then also make sure you go to the Scott Harvath feed. I know it's a little confusing right now, but eventually, once you're subscribed, it'll all be fine. We got Path of the Assassin coming to you, part 1 and part 2. Already recorded those. Those are mint. So know you'll like that. All right, we got to thank our patrons, our special operator, Sherry F., our special agents, Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Dawn, Dennis, Peggy, Catherine, Ray, Bridget, Jeff, and Mark. Whew, that list is getting long. I like it. Please subscribe, rate, and review using your favorite podcasting platform. You can find us online at thrillerpod.com or using our Twitter or Instagram handle at MidtrapPod. And as always, keep the faith.